excited about our next guest. He had an article that came out in Jacobin recently that I mean, if you're interested in the CIA and their secret programs, I don't know how secret it is now, but the article is titled "The CIA's Secret Global War Against the Left," and it is about Operation Condor. Of course, I'm talking to Branko. Now, make sure I'm saying your name right. Marcetic or Marchetic? Which one is it?
Marchetic.
Marchetic.
Even more difficult than
really? Okay, so wait. I have a difficult name, so I need to be taught. Marchetic? Marchetic. Yes?
The best way to do it is if you just smash march and teach together, so the two words together.
March teach.
Set them in quick succession. March teach. You basically got it.
March teach. Got it. All right.
Yeah.
So let's just start off with Operation Condor. What time period was this?
This was from 1975. The dates vary. Different people sort of give it different bands, but until about the early 80s or so. And basically it was this agreement among a bunch of Latin American countries to go after dissidents and not just left-wing radicals and people who are part of revolutionary movements, but people who are even more run-of-the-mill kind of perhaps you'd say establishment-friendly critics of these dictatorial regimes. And it was this idea to sort of expand it beyond the national borders and kind of go throughout all of Latin America and even the world as well.
We've had him on the show, but we just finished up the book, Jakarta Method. And I mean, I'm sure you're aware of the Jakarta Method in terms of this strategy that was sort of launched in Indonesia to eliminate anybody who was merely associated with the Communist Party or unions or the left or appeared to or showed up in a room with them or whatever. But it was essentially genocide of over 1 million people and very soon after turned Indonesia into a capitalist state in which, hotels popped up along the shorelines where folks were slaughtered. And then they use the claim is that they used these same tactics in the global South, specifically in areas, Brazil is a perfect example. Is this part of that strategy, or is this a separate a separate campaign, Operation Condor, a separate campaign from the Jakarta Method?
Yeah, I mean, so Condor was its own thing. It was something that the military dictatorships of South America came up with on their, maybe not on their own, but certainly they came together and said, this is what we're going to do to get rid of all these pockets of resistance. But, I mean, it's not a coincidence that these things kind of carry over from one country or one part of the world to another. I think that the techniques that you saw in Indonesia, I think there is a sort of a link to Condor in the sense that, who's training all these people. A lot of the times it's the CIA, it's US military, advisors who are going over and telling people, this is how you deal with dissent. This is how you deal with people who, are threatening, either your legitimacy or your power or, whatever justification you want to say. It's really goes back to in many ways the fascist regimes of the 1930s. We see a lot of similarities between some of the stuff that happened in Condor and you could even say in Indonesia, and some of the horrors that the 1930s and the 40s were known for in Germany and Italy and so on and so forth. And it's not necessarily a coincidence. There was after World War II, there was a quiet moving of these former fascists, ex-Nazis. Some of them were certainly tried and killed. Others, because they were useful for various reasons to the winning powers, they were then kind of either used to recruit people for sort of ongoing anti-left organizing in those countries, and actually given safe passage to go elsewhere. And so you see people like Nazis like Klaus Barbie, who then went over to Bolivia and Argentina and countries like that. And lo and behold, it happens that those countries end up at some point instituting pretty vile and sadistic measures that are not dissimilar to the stuff that you saw during World War II.
And in partnership with the CIA and the School of Americas, right? So
absolutely.
I'm sorry, there's a little bit of delay. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, exactly. It was the CIA and the School of Americas. The School of Americas, they would Latin American militaries would send officers and the like to the US to study at those schools, and there they would be taught, sort of counterinsurgency tactics. But these manuals that were used to teach people later came to light, and they were teaching them a whole lot more than just counterinsurgency tactics in terms of military warfare. They were teaching them torture and
waterboarding, right?
To disappear, waterboarding, how to get people to open up about things that they want to talk about, through force and drug use and psychological manipulation. So pretty bad stuff.
And when time. I mean, I guess we could focus on maybe Pinochet, but they were rounding folks up just on the street and grabbing them. Can you explain how this operation, for those who've never read about how this specifically went down? How did they target folks and grab them and how did they disappear? And
so for example, let's say if there were Chilean dissidents who were in hiding in Argentina or in exile in Argentina, what would happen is basically the countries of Condor would put together the intelligence agencies would put together a team
committed to passing
squad, a SWAT team, whatever you want to say, that might have maybe nationals from just one country, or they might have nationals from several different Condor countries. It depended. And that team would go, they would track down this particular dissident. They'd maybe surveil them for a while. They'd see what their movements were like, what they did, sort of get an idea of when they were most vulnerable, how they could get to them, so on and so forth. Now, then what would often happen is that team would be replaced by another team who would kind of have a whole bunch of different sections to it. Some of these declassified documents talk about how these special forces teams that were sent by Condor countries were very similar to ones that were used by the US. So, they would have a bomb expert and someone else. They would have sort of all these different kind of tactical elements to those teams, and then they would, whether in broad daylight or something else, when the time was right, when the moment came, they would snatch these people up, throw them in a van, and take them somewhere. Maybe a prison in the countries that they were staying in, maybe a prison in another country. It could be a prison that was known about, or it could be a secret prison. And then typically they would be tortured. Depends how long. Some people were there for months. Many were disappeared. Some were also let out. Many heartbreaking stories of people who simply just vanished and were never heard from again, and no one really knows what happened to them.
There were leaders of well-known leaders that were killed, have been killed around the world in more quote unquote democratic countries. I mean, there was a famous bombing on Embassy Row in Washington D.C. Can you help us understand just how organized this was from an international perspective? I mean, to me, it just immediately, I'm thinking, how can you take somebody to a prison in another country? But this was happening and folks didn't know.
Yeah, so when it was overseas, it tended to be assassinations. Obviously in Latin America, you could easily kind of slip someone through a border, especially because these countries were collaborating. And so you could easily get someone into a prison and do what you want with them. The overseas stuff was mainly about just killing people, getting rid of people, particularly Chilean dissidents or opposition leaders, people who, again, were not necessarily leftists, but maybe had formed some sort of united common front with leftists, with former members of the Allende government in Chile, and sort of tried to diplomatically isolate or otherwise hurt Pinochet's Chile. And so, what you'd see is sometimes they would work with, just alone, or they would hire someone else. In the case of the Embassy Row bombing, the murder of Orlando Letelier, they actually worked with some Cuban exiles. The Cuban exiles were very busy in this period of time. And in other cases,
right?
exactly.
They needed jobs.
And then, sometimes as well in Europe, they were working with ex-fascists, ex and neo-fascists. There's a historian, Patrice McSherry, who's written about this, and she draws connections between what was happening in Condor and Operation Gladio and the stay-behind armies, which are these kind of this shadow infrastructure that the US, through NATO and the CIA, set up in Europe after World War II. If there was ever a Soviet invasion, or God forbid, an actual democratic victory for leftists in these countries, that they would sort of spring into action and do what they had to do to prevent that from happening, whether that meant murder or what have you. And so some of these networks were used to then assassinate these various exiled leaders, opposition leaders. But the one in Embassy Row is probably the most shocking, because of course the US was working with Chile at the time, and for a foreign government to carry out a terrorist attack on US soil, an allied government, technically, was incredibly outrageous. And for good reason, people, there was a scramble to cover up, and obviously a lot of reluctance to let the truth out about what happened.
Was it some sort of intelligence, I don't want to say accident, but if the CIA was coordinating with whoever was the Cuban exiles, was this a lapse, or did they know that this was going to happen? Yeah,
so for example, John Dingus, who I cite in the piece, he says he's looked through the evidence, and he believes pretty firmly that the evidence shows the CIA did not know. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's not culpable for what happened. The CIA knew that there was an Operation Condor. They the US government at the highest levels really encouraged it, both tacitly and openly. The US had played a role in really laying down the architecture of this, even if they didn't take the initiative to really set it up. So the CIA and the US government definitely has its fingerprints and is shares some blame for what happened. I think that's often what happens in a lot of these cases. The CIA has done really terrible conspiratorial and inhuman stuff throughout its history, but there's also an element with these intelligence agencies where they do stuff, and then they encourage things that just get way out of their control, and they fail to stop it for one reason or another, and it ends up blowing up in their face, and they have to basically go back and try and cover up that they had any involvement in it. So in that case, some of the assassins that were sent to the US, they went through the border, and they were given approval by the CIA. The CIA said, let them through. Maybe because they thought, they're doing something else. But again, you have to remember, they knew that this operation was ongoing. So at the very best, it's extreme recklessness on their part.
At what point was this all uncovered? It's not that obviously there's some tactics that still play out in the global South regularly. Maybe they've taken different forms, whether it's breaking apart movement. We could go through all that, but Berta Casares, being killed 4 years ago in an extraordinary way, and it was probably coming from a corporation, but similar tactics are still played out globally, right? But at what point did Americans learn about this secret program?
It happened over decades, so over a long period of time. There were, at the time, there was some reporting or hint that it happened. I think especially the Letelier matter really helped to kind of open things up, because that was so outrageous. But really, people started finding out. I'm not going to be able to give you exact dates here, but it was through the 90s, and really even until now, things are still being declassified. It's that process of declassification that really helped to do it. That, and the fact that in these Latin American countries, once the dictatorships fell and some time passed, there was this movement among victims and victims' families and human rights lawyers to one, get the truth of what happened, but also to get some sort of justice for what was done to so many people. And in the course of that, there were people that were arrested. There was Manuel Contreras, who was the former head of Chile's secret police, who was very much knee deep in Condor. He was arrested and tried, and you had other key members that were had the same fate. And through the course of those trials, more and more information would come out. So you sort of have several different sources of information that has served to open things up and teach us about this. The most recent was last year, I believe. It was something like 100,000 or so, or tens of thousands of cables to do with Argentina that was declassified, and there were a whole heap of new revelations in that, including that actually the allied powers in Europe, France, the UK, and some others, they actually spoke to some Condor representatives and were in talks to see if they could set up something similar in Europe, which is terrifying.
This is in the 80s?
This was, I believe, in the 70s.
70s, okay. How does it, I mean, I'm always curious what the process of declassification is. Like, why do they choose to declassify certain cables or documents? Is it through pressure of lawmakers?
I think part of it is, it depends. I think with the recent ones, the Argentina cables, it was an agreement between the US and Argentina. And also it's one of these things that, once time passes, all declassification has a time limit, or at least most of it does, where past a certain point, you're meant to be able to declassify it. And we sort of shed light on these things that the people have been kept in the dark about for decades or longer, and we finally find out what happens. We saw that with the Kennedy assassination documents that were, there was this one of the last tranches of documents were meant to be declassified rather, in 2017, I think, and everyone thought, oh, here, Trump, Mr. Anti-Deep State, Mr. Anti-CIA, he's going to, stick it to them by following this timeline. And of course, no, he didn't. He said, we're going to keep these wrapped up for another.
He didn't want to be proven wrong. He didn't want to have it exposed that Ted Cruz's dad didn't kill JFK or whatever that conspiracy he had. So how does this relate to more recent time? You mentioned the war on terror, and granted, the tactics, they're not happening like as much on the mainland, but let's talk a little bit about how George W. Bush may have picked up some of the tactics from Operation Condor.
Yeah, and I mean, before I go into that, I think this is part of the reason why people still, when people talk about how Trump is this uniquely dangerous figure, other people will go, well, what about Bush? Sure, he wasn't as impolite and sort of, outwardly racist and misogynistic and everything, but the stuff he actually did was frightening. And the war on terror is the best example of that. It was kind of taking the principles of Condor and except in this case, it was really a global thing, and it was not just countries in Latin America, but it was some of the biggest, most powerful nations in the entire world, the US, the UK, others. And what you had with the war on terror, it was very similar, in its sort of skeleton to what we think of with Condor, where you had there were no borders for one. Somebody could be picked up in Germany, thrown to a van. They end up being tortured in Syria, and then at the end they end up in Guantanamo Bay. They've gone all around the world, and it was very similar with Condor. Where somebody would be picked up in Argentina or Uruguay, shoved into a van, taken to a secret prison in Chile, and maybe disappeared. And so I think that element of it, the lawlessness of it, the transnational nature of it, the use of torture and all manner of techniques that in civilized democratic society are meant to be verboten, all of that really it may not have come directly out of Condor, but it's definitely these kind of techniques to stifle dissent have wound their way through history, and in the 2000s they ended up back in the United States.
What's just so crazy to me is there's also just the fear that is left on citizens who live in those countries to talk about the stories. I mean, it is wonderful that so many families did step up, but when from what I've read about this period and the campaigns, I mean, there were neighbors who were turning in neighbors because they were afraid of also being wound up and seized off the street. So it's the tactics. I mean, not only does it leave fear in the communities, but it's also just turning folks against each other. And I think it's that's I think a different aspect of this that doesn't relate to the war on terror. But I don't know. I mean, I just feel like it's that penetrates into a culture. I mean, Indonesia is a perfect example because people don't talk about it. They're afraid to talk about the massacre because it's painful, and it's literally been the goal was to erase it from history, to erase literally leftists from history.
Yeah, and I mean, I actually wouldn't say it necessarily does not relate to the war on terror because it wasn't like you had people necessarily dobbing people in all the time during the war on terror, but you certainly had people. There was a atmosphere of paranoia that was created by the Bush administration that was telling people, be on the alert. Anyone could be a terrorist. If you see a bag sitting,
if you see something, say something. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's still, I mean, people probably take it less seriously now, but that is still a thing that you will hear in the airport. You had people who were, you had for example, the NYPD surveillance of Muslims in New York City, just ordinary Muslim communities. And there was, I think, certainly maybe not from the state, but I would say probably among right-wing media, there was an encouragement to kind of see people who were completely normal, law-abiding Muslims as maybe something darker. And I think to some extent that's kind of continuing now with Trump, where Trump was yelling about Antifa, kind of just like Condor blowing up the size of Antifa and its importance and how actually dangerous or capable it was to do the stuff that he was alleging that they could, and that I think is a similar thing where the messages Antifa could be anywhere. They could be in your neighborhood. If you see a protest that could be Antifa, and some of that stuff is coming from the liberal side as well, where the idea is that if it's a Black Lives Matter protest or any sort of protest, well that's because that was organized by the Russians, or it was caused by Russian disinformation. Or so there is a spreading paranoia, I think, that hasn't really stopped since the war on terror. It's just kind of changed shape.
We got a question from one of our listeners. Jules T asks, and I'm fascinated by this too, what's the connection between General Salvador Cienfuegos and the CIA, separately, I think, along with the 43 massacred university students in Mexico? So I just watched not a docuseries. It was a series on Netflix. I believe it's called The Candidate. It's produced in Mexico about that massacre. And I know Harvey K, who's in the chat right now, also knows a lot about this because he lived in Mexico City right after the massacre. And, a massacre that was pushed out and organized by the CIA and influenced Mexican authorities to basically shoot down a peaceful organized protest by teachers and faculty and students, of course. Was there any sort of connection between the programs?
Mexico is not part of Condor, so I can't speak to that. But I mean, the CIA has been involved in that part of the world for decades, and not just the CIA, but the U.S. government more generally. We know from just history, the U.S. for a long time, U.S. leadership saw Latin America as its sphere of influence, right? That was what the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine also kind of emphasized that, hey, if we needed to, we will come in and take care of this part of the world, and that all these things that we're talking about are part of that legacy, the CIA was very much involved. They helped set up Chile's secret police, of course. The U.S. government gave the nod. to the coup in Chile, and so many others in that part of the world. And often this was very much to do with US and more broadly Western business interests that were threatened by all these different people's movements in these parts of in these countries. There were a whole host of corporations that were basically lobbying Nixon. You have to do something about Chile. You have to do something about Chile because they felt that Allende's government was going to be a threat to their business interests. Same with the overthrow of democracy in Guatemala in the 50s, where basically it was done because of the United Fruit Company. They were worried about the agrarian land reforms that were going to basically take away the land they were using to grow fruit. And again, they were lobbying the government, and actually members of the government were even they were on the board of the United Fruit Company and so on and so forth. So this stuff has always been pretty solidly intertwined. It's pretty shocking now when you look back on it. But then again, you look at what's going on now, and is it really any different? You have the board member of Raytheon as the defense secretary.
Right, exactly. Let's be real. Board member of Raytheon's defense secretary, and the DNC's rules committee is made up of folks who lobby for weapons manufacturers. So that's the world that we live in. Branko, super fascinating article. Go check it out. It is a great read for the holidays. It's in Jacobin. Right now, it's called The CIA's Secret Global War Against the Left. We'd love for you to come back on. I would love to read this book if you want to write it, if you're not writing it.
There's actually a lot of I'd give a little plug. There's John Dingus, one of the authors who I cite. He's actually coming out with a sequel. I don't know when it's going to come out, but he is working on it. So
great.
Keep your eyes.
Maybe we'll add that to our book club. Awesome. All right, and people are giving you a shout out for, of course, your book on Joe Biden. Joe Biden's Yesterday's Man. Hello, and welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst. And baby, it's been really cold out there. Okay, I don't usually talk about weather on the show, but the crisis in Texas this week has made a perfect case for the Green New Deal. This is the second time in 6 months that extreme weather has overwhelmed the electric power grid in a major state. Last summer, It was the heat and wildfires in California, which sent air conditioning use soaring and forced rolling blackouts, something they're familiar with. This week, the same thing happened in Texas, except it was the brutal, unexpected, frigid cold. And while who can forget a year without power in parts of America's last colony, Puerto Rico? Yesterday, power plants broke down or ran out of gas just as everyone turned their electric heat up in Texas. The system couldn't handle the demand, so power was shut down and Texans were left shivering in their homes and the homeless on the streets. Rolling blackouts are not a good look in a supposedly, modern country with an advanced democracy and the strongest economy in the world. And this will get worse, much, much worse, unless we act like yesterday. Extreme weather is a clear outcome of climate change. Why do we have to say this? Hot days get hotter, dry days get drier, cold days get colder. And as the global climate system is thrown further and further off kilter, we also get more of these strange days where Arctic air comes cascading to Dallas or Athens, Greece. So as the hot days get hotter and some of the coldest days get even colder, the power grid will break down more often unless we make it more resilient. Ultimately, the only solution is to stop pumping carbon and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and reverse climate change. But to do that, we will need more electric power, not less. It's confusing. We will need to charge all of those electric cars and trucks, for example. And we want homes kept warm with electricity rather than fossil fuels. Although it must be efficient electric heat, not that wasteful space heater stuff so many people turned on this week because they don't have heating systems. The future, as they say, is electric. But right now, our electric service depends on an aging fossil fuel plants and a distribution system created in the 19th century. A few years ago, the American Society of Civil Engineers offered a report card on U.S. infrastructure. Remember, infrastructure includes everything from our crumbling bridges and potholed highways to airports that make Ellis Island look welcoming. The engineers awarded the power grid a D+. They called it an aging patchwork, out of date power plants, exposed transmission lines, and wasteful consumption. Even if we did not have a climate crisis, we would still have a crisis of the power grid and a need to build it back for the 21st century. So on top of, one of America's top infrastructure priorities, and possibly the top priority, must be rebuilding this power grid. So it spews off less carbon and ultimately none at all. So it can handle even higher and unexpected peak loads. So power supply is a reason to invest in a business, not an obstacle. And by the way, so the power grid is hardened against cyber attacks. This will cost a lot of money. One estimate is $5 trillion. It could be more. But frankly, that's good news. These are big projects, arguably the biggest infrastructure effort in history. But as Joe Biden has been saying, we need to go big.
Now's the time we should be spending. Now's the time to go big.
This will mean lots of jobs, real, absolutely essential jobs, building clean energy, electric generation, setting up the high power cable to transmit power more efficiently from where it is to where it is needed, building new local grids so power can flow from the solar panels on your roofs as easily as from the wind turbine off the coast. And of course, someone needs to write all the code to make this the kind of smart power grid that knows where the power can be generated most cheaply and cleanly and where it is most needed before rolling blackouts shut off the heat or the air conditioners. We will also need to hire instructors for the programs to train people who lose their jobs in fracking and oil refining and coal mining. They can be part of the workforce that builds the new power grid. Now, of course, this is America. So we can't have this conversation without someone trying to make a culture war out of it. I am looking at Governor Abbott of Texas. The governor of Texas actually tried to blame wind power turbines for the electric failures this week.
Sean, this shows how the Green New Deal would be a deadly deal for the United States of America. Texas is blessed with multiple sources of energy, such as natural gas and oil and nuclear, as well as solar and wind. But you saw from what Trace said, and that is our wind and our solar got shut down, and they were collectively more than 10% of our power grid. And that thrust Texas into a situation where it was lacking power in a statewide basis.
Governor Abbott, okay, he's correct that some of the giant wind turbines froze in the brutal cold, just as power lines snapped and fossil fuel plants failed. But the governor should do a bit of research. The wind turbines froze because they don't have the heaters that are commonly used on the wind turbines in more northern states, where the cold is a normal winter day. Maybe you need to order those, Governor. But more important, how about trying to work together to solve this challenge rather than looking for someone else to blame, Governor? No one is talking about taking away your precious fossil, I can't even say it, your precious fossil fuels today. Nobody is talking about taking it away today. It's coming. It's a transition. It's a fast transition, and it will take time and money, as we said earlier. But Governor, even you know that wind and solar generated electricity is now cheaper than fossil fuels, even in Texas. That's why some of the fossil fuel companies out in West Texas use wind power to generate electricity to run their fracking. Governor, you know that. So as you say in Texas, cut the bullcrap. As you replace old fossil fuel plants with renewable power as part of rebuilding the grid, electric costs for your citizens can go down. And guess what? They might even vote for you again. If you really have them at heart and not just the fossil fuel companies who donate to you, you will fight for that. If you press ahead, wind and solar could deliver half your electricity in the 2030s. This isn't a theoretical debate anymore. The climate crisis is well underway, and it's only getting worse. The only way we will get through it is to speak the truth to each other and then get to work. But it has to happen. Enough of these culture debates. We have to go big. And I'm also looking at you, President Biden. As our friend Napoleon DeLegend said yesterday on the show, it is an opportunity for you, President Biden, to go show the world that we are just the opposite of Donald Trump when it comes to climate, so that Governor Abbott's not speaking on behalf of the entire country and the entire world looking at us saying, you are killing us because you're too obsessed with Fox News debates. It is up to you, Joe Biden, to take ownership of this. Go big. Make a speech about climate. Do more than President Obama did. Go down to Texas right now. Put on your coat. Put on your mittens. Go down with Bernie. Talk about climate. Make this an issue. Make this your case for jobs, unionize jobs in the Green New Deal. Make this a case about transitioning from those dirty jobs into clean energy jobs, actual clean energy jobs. This is your opportunity, Joe Biden. This is it. Do not let the Republicans take this conversation away from what needs to happen right now. Not tomorrow, not in a month, not in 10 years, not in some unachievable transition, but right now. Be the leader for your grandchildren. We have a great show today. Jordan Zakarin and our very own Simon Narode are here. And of course, right after this little break, we will talk to the one and only John Nichols, who's the national affairs correspondent of The Nation. He's going to go back to that thing called the impeachment, which was this week. We're going to talk about how the impeachment trial ended and left us with such an empty feeling about our democracy, our supposed democracy, republic. We'll be right back after the break. We said we'd bring him back, and he's back. The one and only John Nichols. He is the author of many, many, many books, but most recently he's the author for The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party, which is the enduring legacy of Henry Wallace's anti-fascist, anti-racist politics. And he is a national affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine and online, I guess. I don't know. John, you are on mute, just as a heads up. But thank you for joining us. We're excited to bookmark or bookend, that's the proper way of saying it, the impeachment trial with you, which I had to remind people happened just a few days ago. Oh, the world that we live in, John. Yeah. Who would have thought that impeachment would just fly by like that? Impeachment number 2. I'm old enough to remember my first impeachment. I mean,
I'm
okay.
much older than you, and I can remember Richard Nixon's.
You have now gone through 4 impeachments?
Yeah, I was in elementary into middle school, but I believe. But yeah, I mean, I do recall it because I was a political geek even as a kid, and so yeah, I've seen a lot of them over the years. And the perverse part is that some of the same people keep coming back. You know,
okay, Lindsey like who? I'm curious.
Lindsey Graham was part of the Clinton impeachment, major player in the Clinton impeachment. And so, the funny thing about Lindsey Graham and the Clinton impeachment is if you took what he said and simply repurposed it to this one, he would have been the lead impeachment manager against Trump.
Someone who has lots of time and is obsessed with these things as much as we are, it would be fun to see a mashup of that, or almost like, you know, the questions being asked, and then Lindsey Graham answering them with his old questions. So he today is asking questions of the Democrats, and then he's answering as a Democrat.
You could. And the interesting thing about it is you don't even have to go back to 1998, 1999 to do that. You could simply take what he said about Trump in 2015 and 2016 and use those as indictments as well. But the fact of the matter is then you could also use Ted Cruz and a host of other people. And so, I think that impeachment, and I know you'll have brilliant questions on it, and I'm glad to go wherever you want to go, but I'll say up front that I think impeachment is sort of like kind of the national stress test, right? We kind of see whether we're capable of holding someone to account. And as a historian of impeachment, somebody who's written books about it, I can tell you we always fail.
Tell me why.
Power doesn't like to be challenged. Power doesn't like to be held to account. The elites in our political life, like the elites in our economic life, may divide on issues. They may actually argue with one another quite passionately. But at the end of the day, they usually pull their punches when it comes time to actually punish someone who has done great harm. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the impeachment trial that occurred last week was the most important impeachment trial in the history of the country. I don't think there's any question of that. I say that as a historian of impeachment who's read every impeachment trial, read the Constitutional Convention notes on why impeachment was created, the whole bit. I think that last week's trial was by far, by a million miles, the most important. It was also the clearest example of why we have the impeachment power. The impeachment power was created by imperfect white men more than 200 years ago. And they had got a lot of things wrong, but they got one thing right. They knew they were imperfect. And they knew that future leaders would be as well. And as people who had fought a revolution against a king, they wanted to make sure that future presidents would not use the awesome power of the office to perpetuate themselves in that position, i.e. to make themselves kings. And that's exactly what you had with Donald Trump. Clear and simple, easy case. This is why impeachment exists. And yet, at the end of the day, it is important to note that after, frankly, a pretty good prosecution, I think Jamie Raskin and others did a good job prosecuting, they still couldn't get it. Still couldn't get there. So,
I mean, let's go back to the founders for a second. So if the founders, who were very conscious of the fact that, power, all power corrupts, the old line, and that these were humans. Was this the best way to hold a president accountable if he used too much of his power? I mean, was there ever a conversation about something else other than impeachment, or what could have been a better way to impeach, so that in this situation, which you said, a few seconds ago, is the best case for impeachment that we've had, and yet still nothing?
So, Nomiki, the answer to your question is really is a pretty simple one. Is there a better way to do it? Absolutely. And because when you've had presidents who have committed the high crimes and misdemeanors that many of our presidents have committed, and I would always argue that as bad as what happened with Trump, I do think what happened with Trump is the worst, right? It is, because it's the actual attempt to perpetuate power. I don't think we should neglect presidents who've led us into illegal and immoral wars, presidents who've corrupted their offices to enrich their political allies and to warp the policies of this country to benefit themselves and those around them. So, I mean, there's plenty of reasons for impeachment. The better way to do it would have been to say 50% of the House and 50% of the Senate, right? That's simple as it could be. You get a majority vote, person is you've impeached and removed. Now, the only reason they went for the much higher threshold is the argument, the people of the country have put this person in power. You want to make it hard to take him out. I understand that. I respect, the idea of the thresholds. But here's the problem with that. They also established the Electoral College,
right,
which got in the way of the people choosing the president anyway. And so at some fundamental level, if we're going to go by that argument, then the time to impeach Trump was not the second impeachment, but the first one, because he had come to power without even a majority of the vote, without even a plurality of the vote. He got beat in 2016, but only came to power because of the Electoral College. And so you can get lost in the convoluted calculations of all this. But the fact of the matter is that this country was founded by elites. And while the elites understood that there was a need to have some checks and balances on presidential power, and that was a good thing, they were not willing to put an easy check and balance on. And that's where the problem comes in, because we got 57 votes for impeachment or for conviction.
And is that so thinking about that, the other option went up against their personal interests. So the other option would have been, okay, we want to put a check on the president and all power, but let's keep in mind here, the way that we're going to put that check in is to make sure that the mob doesn't have that absolute check over. It's really the elites that have. So ultimately, it's a design flaw, because
yes, it is. Yeah, you can't. My dear comrade and friend over many years now past, Gore Vidal, who Gore wrote the introduction to my book on impeachment. And in typical Gore fashion, he was very encouraging of the book, very supportive of it, but also had a gripe. He always did. And his gripe was that, he said, impeachment's good and we ought to use it to get rid of Bush and Cheney, undoubtedly. What would really be good is if we had the recall power, i.e., if the people of the country, not the politicians, but the people of the country could petition for a new election, at a critical point, say, hey, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney led us into an illegal and immoral war. We're going to petition for their recall and removal from office. Or George W. Bush and Dick Cheney failed to respond to Hurricane Katrina. We're going to petition for their, the bottom line. That would put the power in the hands of the people. And as always, Gore was a genius. And that's not a bad solution. And so we can look at better approaches. But I do think the critical thing is to remember at the heart of it where the problem is. And that is, we have a problem in this country with accountability. We don't hold our elites to account when they commit crimes. That happens in the criminal justice system, that happens in the civil system, and that happens in the constitutional processes of the country. That's what we saw last week. And while all the Democrats got it right, and 7 Republicans came over, which is remarkable, that's still not enough. And I will point to one other kind of flaw in this thing as well. And that is that the elites manage the trial, right? and they sort of have free-floating rules as it goes along. And you'll note that on Saturday morning in this trial, after presenting, again, what I think was the strongest argument for conviction that I've ever seen in any impeachment trial, Jamie Raskin and others, Congressman Raskin came up and said, we'd like to call a witness or so. Now, in a trial, that is not such a radical concept.
Right.
And the senators immediately all said, oh, yeah, good, we're for that. And then they realized what that would involve.
How did they not know that going in?
I think
was that a strategy?
Well, I think that Jamie Raskin and the impeachment managers, I think it's fair to say, were disinclined to call witnesses because they frankly felt their case was sufficient, right? And then on the eve of the vote, the conviction vote, knowing they had an uphill vote, they did what any good lawyer does. They recognized some new information had arisen out of a congresswoman saying, she had evidence, she was willing to testify. And they, it's a little bit of a long bomb, but they said, hey, let's call this witness in. She's got evidence. Let's do it. We can do it fast. We can do it efficiently. That would have opened up a lot of new avenues. But you saw the reaction of Republicans and frankly, quite a few Democrats, which was, yikes, this is getting real. This is becoming serious here.
Why would the Democrats do that, though? Why would they be so worried about it becoming an actual impeachment?
Well, actual trial. I don't think all of them were. I think there were some Democrats who were, who got it. And note that people like Sheldon Whitehouse said, we should have some witnesses here, right? So there were people who got it. But I think that what you ended up with there was a situation where kind of entrenched DC power looked at a hard impeachment or a hard conviction, and it would have been hard even with witnesses. I'm certain of that. It would have been hard. And they said, we really want to get back to not governing on other things. And so, we don't want to drag this out and this could go bad on us. They're constantly second guessing. And this is sort of the disease of a lot of official Washington. They fear impeachment. And that's Republicans and Democrats. They fear a power that can hold them to account and that could actually derail them, pull them out of their political positions they're in. This is so hardwired that, when, again, Bush and Cheney caught out completely on leading us into an illegal and immoral war in Iraq, still didn't get impeached for it. They lied about it. We had the evidence of the lies.
That's a great, so you have in post-Nixon world, which, I think we can all agree that the entire world of politics in this country shifted post-Nixon for the worse. And in terms
a lot of ways,
money in politics, what presidents can get away with, what the loosening of regulations, of course, this and his administration, being part of the Reagan world and then the Trump world, and of course the Bush world in some ways. So, what is it about post-Nixon world? The Bush family, one or two mostly, should have been impeached, like as you just said. Clinton was impeached. Trump was impeached. Nixon's impeached. What is it about this?
Dare I say, Lyndon Johnson should have been impeached for lying about the Gulf of Tonkin.
Wow.
If indeed the lies were told, then that was an impeachable offense, without a doubt. Look at what Vietnam cost us.
So what is it that why this turn and how presidents lead?
Well, we fetishize impeachment, right? We think of it as this really dangerous, really scary thing. And something we only talk about late at night when nobody else is around. And
maybe you do, John.
What?
Maybe you do.
Oh yeah, I'm a geek, right? People will tell you that. But the thing is, but I'm talking about politicians too. It's one of the things that scares them to talk about in public. And so you understand that for a century they didn't impeach any president, even though there was plenty of reasons to do so along the way. Herbert Hoover's handling of the Depression was an impeachable offense by any measure. But they finally did it with Nixon. It was necessary to do it with Nixon. Now we look back at what Nixon did, it was still crimes. There were incredible high crimes and misdemeanors. But compared to, Trump, it doesn't look as bad. But, at that time, in that more innocent age, they were like, okay, we've got to hold this guy to account. They were 100% right. And what they were doing was they were sort of dusting off an old tool, right? Opening up the box and saying, this is dangerous, don't spill it, right? And they got it out. And the House Judiciary Committee actually moved in the proper direction. It was bipartisan. They were heading toward holding Nixon to account. And then he looked at the reality, said, I think I'm heading out of here, going to get on the plane, fly to San Clemente. And the reaction to this, High Crimes and Misdemeanors by Richard Nixon, was instead of saying, well, that's cool, you can resign and fly to San Clemente, but we are still going to impeach and convict you because you committed crimes. It's the same as in any other circumstance. You don't get to quit, like the bank robbing crew right before, you get charged with the crime and say, well, I'm no longer a bank robber here. No, I mean, you still get charged and you still get, tried and convicted. And instead of saying, we're going to do this, they said, oh, see ya. That's great. Thank you for letting us off the hook. Thank you for making it easier for us. The reaction was, instead of seeking justice, it was, no, that's great. This problem went away. And there was one wonderful congressman from Sacramento. His last name was Mann, I believe, M-A-N-N. And he was not a lawyer. He was an appliance dealer who had gotten, guy ran a little, TV and washing machine store in Sacramento, got himself elected to Congress in a Democratic year. And he went to Tip O'Neill after Nixon flew off. And he said, maybe I'm getting something wrong here because I'm not some big constitutional lawyer. But it seems to me if somebody committed these crimes, maybe we ought to still, continue the process, vote to impeach, try him and convict him, because you really kind of want to say to future presidents, this is bad. Don't do this. Well, we didn't. This guy got sent away. Didn't happen. Ford comes along, pardons Nixon, even says, you did all this stuff. We're going to double pardon. And again, most of the elites, both parties said, oh, that's good. Yeah. We don't want to have to deal with this anymore. Take it away from us, right? And that set a pattern. Ronald Reagan did Iran-Contra. He was in the thick of it, right? He lied about it to the American people and then said, oh, yeah, I realized, I still think I did the right thing, but I guess it turns out I lied. And they said, oh, that's cool. We've got all the evidence here. It's amazing. It's not like Nixon breaking into, the Watergate building. Now we got, trading drugs for arms and stuff like that. Yeah, it's unbelievable stuff with our, sworn enemies. But yeah, you're kind of old and you're almost done. So see ya. Go ahead. And then Bush, who's, up to his eyeballs in the thing, he becomes president. And then he pardons the people who ultimately are shown to have been a part of it. And he's not held to account. And again and again and again, I could belabor it forever, but the fact is, we clearly signal as a country, not we the people, but our elected representatives, they really don't like this thing, and they use horrible language as regards impeachment. Impeachment is glorious; it's a wonderful thing. It's like you're coming for the king, and you got the power to take him down. That is great. King sins against the basic premises of the republic. Removed. That's fantastic. And you even do it without violence. I mean, this is way better than Europe. It's got all sorts of great stuff. And yet it's always referred to by Democrats and Republicans as this horrible, traumatic, awful, divisive thing. No, it's not. It's a cool thing. Impeachment is cool.
Here's a thing I was just thinking. Like, if the vice president could run on their own, right? Doesn't have to be attached to the party. Maybe is, maybe isn't. Yep. Do you think perhaps there'd be some sort of incentive maybe to continue on with impeachment, that he would be able to pull the coalition together because he has his own, he or she have their own personal interests to say, all right, you're out. My turn.
You're right about some of these calculations as regards how we choose our leaders, and of course, impeachment is how you get rid of a leader who's done horrible wrong.
Yeah.
And remember, a process that puts people into power who do horrible wrong might be worthy of reexamination itself. And so the point you bring up about electing a president, vice president separately, right? And having this additional sort of check and balance and this additional alternative, somebody who is legitimately, unlike our vice presidents, who is legitimately chosen by the people, not chosen by a candidate and then attached to a ticket, that could open up another avenue, and I think an appealing avenue. It's a legitimate one. Nomiki, you've worked a lot on the reforms of the Democratic Party, right? And the challenges of getting the Democratic Party on track. Good luck to you. And
I've retired from that job, by the way.
Yeah, I think it's overwhelming work. But here's an interesting thing. It used to be, as a historian of these things, used to be that in several states, most notably in New Hampshire, they used to have primary for president and for vice president. Right. And so the people, the grassroots of the party could actually say, yeah, this is who we'd like to see as the presidential nominee. This is who we'd like to see as the vice presidential nominee, because of an understanding that you didn't necessarily want the nominee for president to pick their vice president. That's putting the ease of governing, right, or the ease of campaigning ahead of the popular will. And so we have a lot of these places where, frankly, radical reform is a good idea. Let me offer you two more.
And it could be, and that could be in particular, I mean, to this presidency. I just saw Biden's town hall yesterday, and
which was pretty good.
He was good, but he's old.
He's a little on the old side.
Old, and he's aging, and
kindly though.
Fairly, he talks to little second grade girls,
very nicely.
Very nicely, yes.
And I give him all his due. Yes.
With that being said, there's a very realistic chance that he's something could happen to him. I'm hoping it doesn't, but we could be having a real conversation about this. Somebody who didn't win one state in the primary, an already broken system to elect, could potentially become our president.
With all due respect, though,
yeah,
this is not nearly as bad as we've seen.
I think said fun.
We've had plenty of people assume the presidency, with far less of a claim.
Sure, but I mean, it's I think in an era that, right now where we're looking for more progress and reform, I think there are these ideas. How did that happen? When did the parties decide to pick the vice president? Was it after Henry Wallace? I mean, that was before. They used to always choose a ticket without a process.
Yeah, you always had a ticket. But here's the interesting thing: at the founding of the country, the original Constitution, the top two finishers became president and vice president. Now, in that circumstance, Donald Trump's vice president would have been Hillary Clinton.
Oh my God!
Just to be clear here,
amazing.
And so, or potentially, but that didn't work out really well, because the vice president, make sure I got this right, the third vice president of the United States shot the former Secretary of the Treasury in a dispute over some election issues. And so we wrote a really good play about it, but then we decided maybe that's not the best system. Look, if you really want to talk about reform.
Our old vice president, I think he gets a bad rap. I gotta say.
What's that?
I think he gets a bad rap. That was a good Tammany Hall guy.
The interesting thing is that, again, Gore Vidal wrote a book about him that was rather favorable. Yeah, but no. Look, here's the bottom line. You want to talk about the reforms that we ought to do? I'd love to see a bunch of reforms as regards presidency and vice presidency and all these things like that. I happen to be of the view that we're kind of lucked into a relatively good president and vice president right now. They're certainly better than what we had. But it's always a luck of the draw there, and I find it to be a very unsettling reality. So yes, do I think that we should have the ability to recall presidents, as Gore Vidal suggested? Yes, I do. That's what a democracy would do. Do I think that we should have the ability to have a special election if a president dies or resigns or something else, whatever happens? Yes, it's a democracy. We're supposed to handing it off to a vice president. No, that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to have a vice president who can occupy that position in that emergency period before you organize an election. But yes, I mean, I think it's absurd. And by the way, that vice president would get a big advantage because they'd be the sitting person, But I think it's absurd to have a system that says, yeah, we go through years of campaigning and organizing to get a president, and then if someone has to resign or falls into ill health or whatever, then we just hand it off, right? So that's number one. I'd love to see that kind of discussion. That's big constitutional reform, though. That's going into the body of the document. And as long as we're there, I wouldn't mind discussing the U.S. Senate, because with all due respect, this is the last thing I'll throw into this mix here, is that the senators who voted to impeach or to convict Donald Trump represented 62% of America. The senators who voted to acquit him represented 38% of America. So, and we see this on, Amy Coney Barrett sits on the Supreme Court, not, with the support of senators who represent the majority of Americans or anywhere near the majority of Americans, but with the support of a tiny minority, senators representing a tiny minority. So the Senate doesn't work. It doesn't work as a small d democratic body. It doesn't represent. And this is something that ultimately we have to discuss. Changing its makeup is really hard, except if we add some states.
I will say state, because statehood in Puerto Rico, the statehood party, is a far right-wing racist party. And I think the people of Puerto Rico would not be...
Puerto Rico will let them decide. Let everybody decide. I was actually talking about the Virgin Islands.
Virgin Islands, that's an interesting... Oh, good. Look at you shaking it up a little bit.
I'm hip to that. I'm not making anybody be a state.
Yeah.
That's my rule.
That's the right rule to
strongly
live by.
And I've been one of the longtime advocates for alternative visions as regards where Puerto Rico might go. But we got Micronesia too. We got a lot of places that are not currently represented.
They also, this is a whole other conversation. Many of these places see themselves as their own countries that speak their own languages.
They do.
And it's not just right to decide, but it actually may not even make their lives easier or...
Here's the answer, Nomi.
I love the Puerto Rico conversation, by the way. I could go on this for
I love
2
it
hours.
And here's the answer. Here's the answer on all of these. We have about roughly 8 million Americans who can't vote for president. Well, the DC folks can, but so that takes that down a little bit. But we have, about 8 million who do not have House or Senate representation.
Taxation without representation.
Exactly. So whether we go statehood, whether we go with some alternative model that simply allows them to have representation, nobody should live in this country and not have a vote for president and congressional representation and Senate representation. Now, how you divide that up and where you associate it, what you do, how big someplace has to be a state. I understand all those questions, but we ought to be discussing that because it's absolutely atrocious that we have a Senate right now that is dramatically unrepresentative, right? It doesn't represent the will of the overall mass of people. And B, doesn't include representatives for 8 million Americans.
What if we combine 2 states?
Or
what if we just took I'm not going to name the states because they'll get really mad at me, but what if we took some very far right states that have one congressperson or whatever and just combine them with a few other and just had one,
Well, here's another twist. How about dividing up states?
Oh.
Yeah.
Actually, that's more likely to happen because, how many
that's
states
not
versus down?
It's not a perfect solution either, by the way, because, you might end up, with 5 Texases, right? And one or two of those Texases would be a very, very liberal state, right? Yeah. Probably 2 of them. But you might have 3 conservative ones. I understand that. California, blah, blah, blah.
This is so much fun.
Yeah.
It's like imperialism within the borders of the country.
Or
reverse imperialism.
Reverse imperialism, I think. It's why I am a militant advocate for Scottish independence.
Yes. And Catalonia and many others. Real quick before you leave, we have a question from the audience. They ask, it's Yodeler Yodels is who's asking the question. Do you think that the House Senate would move to disbar Trump from holding political office at the 50% threshold now that the impeachment has failed?
They have the power to do that, I believe. This is something that's been raised by a number of scholars, frankly. It's come from the academic community, if you will. and which is sort of terrific. And people who are experts on Reconstruction and the Reconstruction amendments to the Constitution, 13, 14, 15, will tell you that, in fact, those amendments were written with a lot of purposes. But one of the purposes was to make sure that the people who had just committed treason did not come right back in and govern. And so there's no requirement in there that a president be convicted of high crimes and misdemeanors in order to be disqualified from running again. That it doesn't say that there at all. And so, yeah, you'd have legal wrangling. People would file suits and there'd be grumbling and blah, blah, blah. But again, if we had elites that were actually willing to hold people to account for their high crimes and misdemeanors and wrong-headed actions, this is a vehicle that they could use. And here's the interesting thing about it. At the start of World War II, Michael Foot, the great British socialist, and a couple of his comrades wrote a book called Guilty Men. And they identified all the people who had appeased Hitler. And they had big chapters on all of them. And they said, these people should never be in government again.
Such a great thing to put into. So smart.
And they did it like weeks after Dunkirk. I mean, right at the start of the war. They said, these people should never, ever be near government again because of what they did. Now, the interesting thing was they were not barred from being in government. And, but they were so effective in putting that down that it really did destroy a lot of careers. And so because I fear the elites are unlikely to hold one another to account, even with the disbarment from running again for president, something like that, I think it falls to us, you and me, and the listeners here, we the people. We have a duty to remember and to identify the guilty men and to ask the tough questions, to talk freely and happily about real reforms and about a better country. And we need to ask the deeper questions as well. Why only impeach for the constitutional crimes that he committed? Why wasn't Donald Trump impeached for his brutal mishandling of deliberate mishandling of the COVID crisis that has left 500,000 people or almost 500,000 people dead? If we have a higher standard of accountability in this country, one that really goes to the crimes that harm people, we will be a better country. And whether we get that from Congress or the Senate or from the elites, or whether we have to bring it ourselves, however we get to it, it's necessary because accountability drives policy. You don't solve fundamental problems unless you hold those in the elites, those who maintain the status quo, to account.
I'm looking forward to reading your new book called That Names the Names, and and I'll work on the memes for it, I guess. No, I won't.
Just send me whatever you got.
John Nichols, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us. Hope to have you on when Tish James is in full investigation of Donald Trump, and we can analyze from that perspective, because we shall not forget. It's great. It's a great feeling to move on, but also never again. So thank you so much.
Move on to the next accountability moment.
I love that. There's plenty of it.
Thank you so much for having me, Nomiki. I really appreciate it.
And go check out John's fantastic book. I personally recommend it. It is called The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party, The Enduring Legacy of Henry Wallace's Anti-Fascist, Anti-Racist Politics. Definitely worth reading. We should have you on to discuss that again, maybe for the book club. That would be a fun one to do. But as always, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we will be back right after this break with Simon and Jordan to talk about today's lots of news, lots of stuff happening.
Thanks, Nomiki.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, I hope.
I can't see you now. Huh.
Oh, we covered a lot of turf.
So good. You're on, by the way. Don't say anything bad. You're still on.
I won't say anything bad. It was an honor to be with you.
It was always, always, always an honor to be with you. Thank you for giving us your time and your brilliance.
And I'm going to check out and go write about the Texas energy crisis.
Man. That's what we opened with today.
It's a good story. That's a hell of a story.
Horrifying. I can't wait to read. All right. We'll talk soon.
Be strong.
Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Guys, are you part of our book club? We have some more partnerships to announce. Not only do we have Verso Books, we now have Haymarket Books partnering up with us, our great comrades over there doing the good work, supporting authors who are taking on corporate interests, taking on the military-industrial complex, and so much more. We are working with them on our book club. So go check out our book club at patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. You can sign up for 1 book a month, 2 books a month, or 4 books a month. And it comes with great podcasts that are interviews with people about the books or the authors themselves. And we're hoping to do some events, virtual events in the near future over Zoom, most likely, I believe, with our book club members. All right. Simon Narode is a member of our team. He was part of Bernie 2020 as an organizer. And we have Jordan Zakarin back, who is, I'm loving your background, Jordan. I'm like seeing it much more clearly right now.
Really?
What is that book behind you? I'm very curious.
We got we got a Communist Manifesto in graphic novel style.
Oh, it is.
Yes.
It's graphic novel. I'm like, I can't see, but it looks like it. Love it.
Yeah.
Very on brand.
At an independent bookstore. So, I'm really trying to be as woke as possible today.
You should join our book club.
Should.
Jordan Zakarin is the head of he runs Progressives Everywhere newsletter, tongue twister, can't say it all together.
All good.
Okay, so big story of today. Man, climate change is catching up with some Republicans who are forced to actually deal with what's happening. That, it's not just, remember that time, just as a little throwback here, remember that time when they threw a snowball and on the floor of the House, I believe, and said, climate change isn't real. I have a snowball right here.
I think it was James Inhofe who brought a snowball on there.
Yes.
Out of his mind.
Out of his mind. Well, I'm not always the biggest MSNBC fan, but Chris Hayes really killed it last night. And I just want to roll this clip of him talking about this disaster in Houston right now.
Operators daily forecast through the weekend. Did you get all that? Okay, that's the people that run the Texas grid. Wind power outages are, quote, the least significant factor in the blackouts, and the main factors are frozen instruments at natural gas, coal, and even nuclear facilities. It is just a lie that wind turbines, green energy, are the root causes of the problems in Texas right now. It is a lie like Donald Trump won the election, a lie like there was widespread voter fraud, a lie pumped into millions of people's brains as they watch TV. And let's be clear, this is probably as consequential a lie as any about the election, because energy and how we produce it is the single biggest issue this country will face in the medium term. I mean, this stuff is complicated. Let's be clear here, right? Everyone takes the power grid for granted unless you work on it for a living. It's among the most arcane areas of public policy. It's not like sparking great debate on cable news. But then a few times a year, something like this happens, and we all have this moment where we remember the power grid is the foundation of modern civilization. It is also the key to overcoming climate change. Republicans and right-wing media, they want to take every policy issue and turn it into some painful culture war idiocy. And there's an interest to do it. The fossil fuel companies want this too, right? They want to turn it into some culture war idiocy about the libs don't want you to have power.
Okay.
But we have an opportunity. We have a choice collectively as a country.
So he talks about this as if they believe in these culture wars, that it's not just about being a distraction tactic. But what I saw with this was them actually recognizing, maybe partially for the first time, that climate change exists, but then blaming the solution to climate change, the incremental solution, I should say, for the climate change. This is some like jujitsu, right? Simon, your eyes are rolling. Do you have whiplash from that argument?
It's so frustrating because, a lot of the problems could have been actually solved if we had better invested in the infrastructure for cleaner energy. It's like very much like they're taking the opposite approach. And really what we need to be doing is putting more money into this infrastructure so that these things like wind turbines don't freeze. But they're just turning it the other way around. It's really frustrating to watch.
Is this just a delay tactic, Jordan? Like, is it always about them coming up with different excuses so that the industries can like figure out their finances and start reinvesting in different places? I mean, I said this in the opening that, fracked gas power plant, other places, they're running off of wind right now because it's cheaper. So
yeah, I mean, they've been, Texas especially, they've been off the normal power grid that everyone else is on since the 30s and the New Deal because they did not want to be regulated. So this is the Texas spirit. They've been avoiding dealing with climate change, dealing with regulations for the last 80 plus years, 90 years. And so for them to blame it on, the left, which again has zero power in Texas. I wish that Democrats could take blame because that would mean they were in power. It's pretty desperate. It's one of those things where that's just their, I don't even know if it's a delay tactic. It's just like their instinctual thing, blame it on the left. But, when the left has no power in Texas, because they didn't win any of these elections down there. And, it's very clear that Texas doesn't charge income tax. They let the oil industry do whatever they want down there. It's clearly the right-wing Republicans' fault. I will say that hopefully no one on Fox, was watching Fox News. Hannity said all those things, Tucker Carlson said all those things, but no one had power, so maybe they just couldn't see it. They're trying to blame things on the left. No one in Texas could watch it. They're all like, it's horrible that they don't have power, but they're trying to poison the minds of people who are just literally trying to stay warm. So maybe that's
I mean, this is also just like why those mutual aid networks are so important, why Democrats should be hyper-local, why the Democratic Party should be the organizing party, because these are the moments when people remember, these is old machine politics, but they remember who comes to your door and says, do you need an extra blanket? Do you need some hot water? Can I help you? That's why that stuff is the perfect antithesis to this BS propaganda that's just rotting people's minds right now.
Well, if you remember back in Superstorm Sandy, right, in New York, New Jersey, I was there. I was here. I lost power for a week. Was lucky to crash with friends, and it wasn't, negative 20 degrees outside. But Chris Christie in New Jersey, not a very popular guy, not a very popular governor at the time. He sprung to action. I mean, he bullied people on the beach and, yelled at people on the boardwalk and was just kind of a jerk. But he took action and whatever that action was, but he seemed like he was trying to do something.
Yeah.
He was Cuomoing it, he was actually doing damage, but acting like he was doing good. And that helped him win re-election the next year, in 2013.
And then he closed an exit off of a bridge and then all hell.
Yeah, that was
which is just back to the previous conversation we have with John Nichols. I mean, the fact that Chris Christie could go down for that, which is a really bad thing. I'm not discounting what happened. He could go down for that, but Donald Trump couldn't go down for inciting a riot or many other things that he's done.
There's some sort of Teflon on that guy, but besides, I don't know. Like Greg Abbott was on Fox News last night. He should be doing anything but that. The Attorney General there, Ken Paxton, has been charged with 35 crimes. That guy. So hopefully this is the beginning of the end, not the beginning of the end, beginning of the beginning of taking people down like that. Because at some point, ideology doesn't work. It doesn't work on people if they literally don't have power in their homes.
I mean, it's the Green New Deal. We just have to be real about this. Is we don't have the votes for the Green New Deal. We don't have nearly anywhere near the votes for the Green New Deal right now. And I don't know if there's an alternative strategy that speeds things. I mean, I don't know what could be a better case for the Green New Deal than the fact that Puerto Rico did not have power for a year. Part of Puerto Rico did not have power for a year. That Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy happened and wiped out half the island of Manhattan of power for a week. The fact that California loses power every year for different parts of California, not to mention rich people's houses fall into the ocean or are lit on fire or whatever. How much more personalized could it get for them to do something? It's not even, this is beyond psychosis at some point. It's like with all the money, all the power you have in office, it's just, it's like the police unions, right? They must have something on these people. They must be holding something over their heads for them not to rise up into action and say, okay, the Green New Deal, which is, by the way, not perfect. It is a great transition. It is a progressive transition, right?
I guess these people have been in power for so long. They've been in power for so long. They have, been so comfortable so long. Their houses are not falling into the ocean. Like even in Texas, when a couple of years ago during that hurricane, it was a gigantic catastrophe. Actually, Trump went to go try and help them because, they're not, all Latinos from Puerto Rico. But these people are not in any sort of danger, I guess is what it is. They have not experienced that. They haven't dealt with it. And they haven't been anywhere near, people who are dealing with it. Their donors aren't those people. Their donors aren't people who are saying, "Oh, my house was destroyed." So I guess they have nothing to worry about, and half of them are 80. So what do they care? Yeah. Climate can change. Who cares? Maybe their grave will slide into the ocean, but other than that,
Simon, go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm going to mute myself while I laugh.
They're so out of touch with their constituents and with the just normal people in this country who just like the less money you have or the darker your skin tone, like the more you're going to be feeling the effects of climate change sooner and harsher. And so the people in Washington are not those people, right? They're not representative of that of those constituents. So to answer your question, Nomiki, like what can we do if we can't get the votes for the Green New Deal? A lot of what we can do is work locally. Here in Oregon, there's been some push to get an Oregon Green New Deal. We have not been able to manage, but you can do a lot of stuff even on your city level to get some things changed. And it's not a huge systemic solution, but it's the start of something. It's a lot more accessible usually on that scale.
Yeah, I think that's the smart strategy. Is you have to do both at the same time. It's not one or the other. Even pushing for it nationally makes it more popular at the local level, and gives more leverage. I mean, I can only speak on behalf of New York where I live, but had Bernie Sanders not run at the national level and elevated the conversation around Medicare for All and a bunch of other issues, we probably wouldn't have a Democratic Senate in New York, because all these people felt that they had the landscape was set for them to challenge some of our rogue senators and bad Democrats who were caucusing with Republicans, and their volunteers were Bernie Sanders supporters. And so suddenly we're having real serious conversations about, the New York Health Act, which is like a Medicare for All bill in New York, or a Green New Deal, or taxing the rich, things that weren't even on the table just a few years ago. So I think that's a great way to put it, is when we go national, also go local.
Yeah. And I think that, we're looking at your student debt. Biden talked about it last night. We're talking about anything with the filibuster, expanding the Supreme Court yesterday. So like even just today, Georgia tried to get rid of, and they already passed within the state Senate, no absentee voting. So that's huge. And we should be expanding the Supreme Court and adding seats and ending the filibuster and passing a Voting Rights Act. And I think, why wouldn't they do that? Because it'll help Democrats. But they don't care if it'll help Democrats. They care if it helps them, lawmakers. And so all of these things that should be done don't benefit them personally. And once one of those things happens, more seems possible. Once a filibuster is killed to expand voting rights, why can't the filibuster be killed for minimum wage increase, which is supported by like 80% of the country? It's crazy that they won't drop the filibuster just for that. But that's what happens when like their careers are more important than the ideals that they're supposed to represent.
I mean, what's really killing me about this era that we've entered, and this is why we do so much analysis of the right wing and the right wing media, is we are beholden. It's beyond being beholden to the Republicans now. We are beholden by far right policies. The fact that we're not even able to push through a vote for a $15 minimum wage at this point, after 10 years, is embarrassing for the Democrats, who have had power in several states. Great work in many states that have passed it with the party or not. But it just shows you the absolute failure and courage of our current Democrats, and how much they are beholden to an extreme far right. And I don't mean just a racist right. I mean an extreme far right economic set of politics, which is by default racist. I want to quickly move to, speaking of racism, remember Bill O'Reilly? Remember that guy?
Who?
Yeah, exactly.
He's like a podcast now or something?
He does. He's just a small podcaster. Although we shouldn't joke, because Rush Limbaugh, who just died, had the most popular radio show of all time. So
it's a shame that.
And Bill O'Reilly had the most popular cable show, I think, of all time. Or at least, of the time. So Bill O'Reilly says in a tweet, let's put that tweet up. Mr. Biden says there is a, quote, rise in white supremacy. Where? Okay, guys, it has been a little over a month since we had a racist insurrection on the Capitol in which people who were chanting Hitler outside and wearing shirts that called for another Auschwitz, who were saying things like white power, they stormed the Capitol. Was Bill O'Reilly asleep?
He was in the no spin zone, and it happened in the spin zone. Is what happened. So he didn't see it. Was the problem?
I mean, this is it. I wish this was just a. I wish this was a joke, but this is somebody who millions of people listen to every single day, and it's like they're issuing the talking points for voters now. Simon, I mean, you live in Portland. You've seen these people up close. You've been doxxed by them.
And it's really terrifying that that Bill O'Reilly is, can get away with saying things like that and have like 40,000 people like that tweet. The conservatives are doing all they can to change the meaning of white supremacy, and I think that it's become our job on the left to really explain very clearly what white supremacy is and what it looks like. Because what white supremacy looks like today in 2021 is not what white supremacy looked like, 200 years ago. It's different. It's sort of codified into these systems that we have in the government, and in our economic system. And it's really just I don't know what it is that we need to do to get through to people. We're never going to get through to Bill O'Reilly, but to the people that he speaks to tell them this is what white supremacy looks like today, and we're seeing it right now, and it just gets worse.
And I think, Rush Limbaugh was around for a very long time, but really took off in the 80s and 90s. And it was the 90s when they got rid of, a lot of the FCC guidelines, right? So that's all those big radio stations could conglomerate, could be bought up. And the same thing, we're seeing newspapers being bought off by hedge funds constantly and just being destroyed. And so it's the media landscape itself. Cable, cable is still very strong, and that allows a big company like Fox to not win a vast majority of viewers, but like a sizable segment of them a sizable enough segment. And so this is, it's all enabled by corporate money, which is enabled by the laws that just loosen regulations. And I don't know that I can't imagine any Democrat or Republican wants to further regulate the media. They'll be destroyed for it. But allowing this kind of vertical integration and this monolith and these huge radio companies that are run sheerly for profit and by terrible people who want to see these policies put in place so they can continue to deregulate. I mean, that is all connected too. It's not like they just happen to win and get all the most listeners because they happen to be the most dynamic.
Right.
They're put in place by people who are more powerful than them.
No, that's 100% true. I mean, it's so funny about Bill O'Reilly. I used to do a debate segment every week on Wednesdays with this person who later attacked me at Fox News physically and then sued me when I tweeted about it and then got her lawsuit thrown out of court. I can now speak about that. It was a real fun one. She herself was extremely conservative, but we used to do this regular segment, and it had the ratings were like, I was shocked by how these ratings, I mean, they were incredible ratings, and it was, we kind of looked alike, and Bill O'Reilly was like really into it, and it felt like I was entering the terror zone, not the no spin zone. But, I was there as the leftist going up against them and doing the whole dynamic. The reason I say it is it is absolute political theater. And they're doing this, they know very well everything they say is inflammatory and it's doing well with the ratings, and they think they have a punching bag, but not always. It is a game. They're gamifying the media, and they've been doing this for years. They did it on CNN, they do it on MSNBC, they do it on Fox, and the ratings are equal to the gamification. Shep Smith's ratings were nowhere near what Bill O'Reilly's ratings are in terms of the debates and the back and forth, or Ingram, whatever her name is, Laura Ingram. these are people who have been trained, and they've down to the millisecond how much this is gamified and intentional to push. I mean, everything from, Roger Ailes used to do this thing where he would say, you don't wear big earrings on TV. It distracts the viewers from your face. And they knew that the viewers, the more that they looked at a pretty woman, the less information they would process. That was an actual study. The male audience. So this is the media culture that we've lived in. And then you have this extra boost from, lack of net neutrality, no media oversight. It's not that shows like this don't do well with an audience. It's just not only are we not boosted, we don't have, it's not equal. We're actually put down, and it's only getting worse. I'm glad you said that, Jordan, but it's just, I have so many flashbacks of being in cable news and being like,
Oof. I think it's also, there's a coherent, for better or worse, and it's worse, coherent ideology for conservatives that I don't think exists necessarily for a long time on the left, right? It's like guns, God, freedom, and gays or whatever, Yeah. And I don't think we're, they always say that we are the ones who are, persecuted. There's that persecution complex. And so it's a matter of this, it's like this cultural, they're whipping them up. They're whipping up into fervor, and they're like all on the same side, and they're all have the same ideology. And I think the beautiful thing about the left is that it's a very diverse place with people who, have different religious beliefs. They have different cultural beliefs. They have different, a whole range of it. But I think that because of that coherence, so to speak, of evil on the right, I think that adds to it as well. You kind of know what you're going to get, and that they're speaking kind of in a weird way on your behalf. Like they are outraged on your behalf, and I think that helps too.
That's actually the psychology. It's very smart. A great way of phrasing it. The persecution. Anytime I see people in the media who have huge followings talk about being persecuted, I'm like, oh, that is a strategy. I know that's a strategy. That is something they teach you conservative message trainings to do.
Yeah.
Simon, go ahead.
Yeah. I think it's that makes a lot of sense for why, conservatives tend to be, white and cisgendered and straight, and because it's like people who don't really have an understanding of what persecution, repression, oppression actually are, and so they can throw these terms around and say, I am being oppressed, as they're on like Fox News,
censored.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to, the era of civil rights, where they felt like the white person was being the one who's oppressed because things had to change a bit. And so I think it goes back for so long. And there's that tradition of being like, the silent majority, even, Nixon's, silent majority. I think like that is where it kind of comes from. Or, long before that, but I think that's the modern version of it.
Do you guys have a few more minutes? You good? Yeah. Okay. I want to quickly talk about this town hall yesterday where President Biden is talking about student loan relief, student debt relief. Let's play that clip.
Student loans are crushing my family, friends, and fellow Americans.
Me too.
The American dream is to succeed, but how can we fulfill that dream when debt is many people's only option for a degree? We need student loan forgiveness beyond the potential $10,000 your administration has proposed. We need at least a $50,000 minimum. What will you do to make that happen?
I will not make that happen.
Student loans are crushed.
I feel your pain. I hear your pain. That was like, that wasn't like, I feel your pain. It was like, yeah, you think I'm kidding. I know some kids who, in our family, the third cousins we don't talk to, who've got some student loans. I told them to go to Ukraine and go work for my son. Try to pay him off. That's how we deal with it. Why can't you do that? Come on, guys. Just go work for an energy company.
It's kind of the perfect example of not really understanding what the deal is. I'm sure when Joe Biden's, his kids were with the school probably the, 80s and 90s, it was expensive, but he was also, his kids went to private school and they were, he was a senator, and I don't think that he quite gets it. I don't think he's probably talked to anyone that's dealt with student debt in that way in so long. I don't think that senators really understand it. They can look at the math. They don't really get how crushing it is. Even they talk about, Biden said, I don't want people who want the elite private schools to get the help. And it's like, people who go to elite private schools who are wealthy already pay for it. They've paid for it because they're wealthy. It's the people who go to elite private schools and don't have the money, but they're told to go because that's their key to success, which doesn't come because this generation after generation has just been crushed. And those are the people who need it most in a lot of cases.
They probably wouldn't qualify for it too. Let's make that. These are federal loans. We're not talking about private loans.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, yeah. I mean, I think it's a matter of just like those people need help, and it shouldn't matter like how much money you make. You know, it shouldn't matter. I mean, to some degree, like it shouldn't matter how much money you make or what school you go to. You know, if you're, I feel like we've been told, especially people our age, like their whole lives, go to college, it'll all work out, and then you leave college and income hasn't risen in like 30, 40 years.
Simon.
Yeah, I was just going to say in response to what Jordan was talking about, how Biden is maybe a little bit out of touch, a little bit removed from the suffering that people have now, or the kinds of debt that people are carrying. I think you're absolutely right. And I actually watched like the longer version of his answer, and it just gets worse. Like he goes and talks about how at one point he was the poorest senator, and his children went into all of these, like he's like, oh, my son went to Yale and got this degree and then had a bunch of debt. And I'm like, okay, well, most people can't even go to Yale, like, and if they do take on that kind of debt, like they don't have a parent who's a senator. It's like he's just totally, and he goes on for minutes and talks about that, and then he goes and says, oh, and then like, but you will be able to work off some of your debt, which is ridiculous because people are already trying to work off their debt, and they're not, and it's clearly not working for them. So it's really, really, really like frustrating, and just reeks of this sort of like total detachment from like the average American's experience.
And just in terms of economics, right? Like it'd be $1.9 trillion if you wipe that out, or a lot of that out. So many people will be free to, I don't know, have a kid, get a house, get a home, spend money in the economy. We're getting to the point where anyone below the age 40 has no savings. And what are the things going to happen? You think the economy is just going to keep going the way people are when they're in debt? And not only that, then people would flock to Democrats for generations. You know,
that's right.
Like the same thing with the New Deal. If they were to relieve $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 in college debt, I would vote for anybody who would do that.
Yes. I mean, it's nothing about this makes any sense to me. First off, he can, with a pen, he can wipe it away, and it literally does not affect anything. Anything.
The government owns it. It's not even private debt.
It's not private debt. Furthermore, he comes from Credit Card Delaware. I'm pretty sure that these credit card companies would love it if the people who grew up off of credit cards because they couldn't afford to survive could suddenly start paying off their credit cards because they had some extra money. So there's that. I think the landlords would love it because they're like, oh, look I can keep people in housing because they don't have to first go to their student loans because they can't get rid of their student loans and go live in their parents' basements, as Hillary Clinton said. You know, it would solve so many of the other crises in which other industries are now suddenly struggling because everybody who has a student loan has to pay their student loans first, or else they're coming for you. You don't have a choice other than like working it off. Oh, you want indentured servitude now?
But you know who passed that bill, who sponsored that bill in the Senate to make it undischargeable was Joe Biden.
Yeah. So he's got to, he's just living out his. Well, that's the other thing is like there was such a sometimes he does this thing that Bill Clinton I've noticed has been doing lately, or like last 10 years. They get very angry when confronted and lose whatever that touch that they've always, when they're on and when they're campaigning and when they're talking to the second grader, or Bill Clinton's, out there shaking hands. What that got them into office, the campaign mode. The campaign mode switches off. And it's like the guillotine mode. The guillotines are coming, and they just like put their foot down even more. Whether it's Bill Clinton arguing with the veteran at a diner, if you guys remember that clip, or arguing with Black Lives Matter protesters, or this, it's like this inhumane side. It's just revealed, and you're like, oh, you're just completely heartless. You disgusting human. You know exactly what's going on. And the fact that you're still better than Trump just shows you the state of this country right now.
It's like Andrew Cuomo, except he's not charming, really. He gets even more pissed when he's challenged.
Jordan, next week, we could just do an entire Andrew Cuomo segment. That's a show.
I spoke with Ron Kim this weekend, and then Cuomo just ripped on him. And
yep, I'm Assemblyman Ron Kim, Queens, shout out.
Yep, I don't want to get into Cuomo, but I'm glad that people realize what a terrible person he is.
Yes. If I will give a shout out, if it's still on the market, I don't know if it's easy to find or hard to find. There's a great biography about Andrew Cuomo that Michael Shaman. I apologize to Michael, but it's a great book if you can find it. I don't think it's being printed anymore because Andrew Cuomo does what he does. Very good writer. It was unauthorized, of course, but really good, very well sourced and checked. And I believe that the author is now writing about art.
Yeah, I'm sure his source is dried up.
I tried to get an interview with him a while back, and he was like, I am no longer talking about Andrew Cuomo. I now write about art. I was like, and that tells you. By the way, breaking news, Andrew, I think the Cuomo family, Contender, that's it. Exactly. Thank you. You are on it. Although we don't push Amazon. It's just the only way we can find it. Shayerson, that's it. Turns out an aide to Andrew Cuomo is rumored to be taking over CNN.
Well, good. Is it Chris Cuomo?
No, it's just going to be all Cuomos. Maria Cuomo's going to have a cooking show, and no, it's whatever. I forgot Andrew Cuomo's mom's name. They're going to talk about their risotto recipe.
Wasn't he married to a Food Network host for a while?
Yes, but they've broken up.
They're dating.
So.
Okay, yeah.
No, they were together for a long time. Now we're on to the portion of the Cuomo gossip segment. Simon, have any thoughts?
No, I'll leave this one to you.
Lucky.
All right, guys. If you want to stick around, Jordan and I are going to do a 2-person show on the Cuomo family. All right. Everybody be well. Thank you so much, Simon and Jordan. Always a pleasure having you on Wednesdays. And we got some shout outs here. Our dear friend, Marcus Farrell, just want to give him some love. They have, I'm sure you guys, if you haven't checked it out, check out Clickbaity Political Thirst Trap. On YouTube, just put that in the search bar. Their new show, fantastic show. I've been on it when it was in the morning, and now they've got an evening show. Definitely go check out the show. They do great work. Marcus has been on the show, and as always, I know I can't say Marcus's name without saying reparations with everything else. Smart. Fadi Enton sends us some love. Thank you, Fadi. And Ian Kinzel says the conservative persecution complex sounds like me complaining about my basketball team never making the playoffs. We were robbed 15 years in a row. Except no, they're always in power. They always win. So they still feel persecuted. It would be like if you were Tom Brady and you're like, I'm really not good with the sports references, but it would be like if you were Tom Brady and you're just like, it's so hard winning Super Bowls and just like all the cleaning I have to do of these trophies. You just don't understand. It's just so much work having to shine the trophies, which I guess he insulted those too. The Dynamic Dreamer. To be fair though, how many lefties actually listen to the radio? Great question. I used to work for SiriusXM and we actually didn't know, or I didn't know, I should say. They do. Dr. Dragon Rider, what do you think about the pronunciation of, I'm going to say PR because this gets to it. I feel bad not pronouncing it correctly with my PR friends. However, if I was a politician, it would feel like pandering. I tried to practice my Spanish. I worked on the island, as so many of you guys know, and we try to have regular guests on from the island or part of the diaspora. I was told there's 2 ways. I always roll my R's. I try to roll my R's, but it's Puerto Rico, like port, or Puerto Rico. But please correct me if you were from the island, because I don't want to be it's not up to me to decide. So maybe we'll have somebody on and ask them. I know exactly who to have on next week. We'll bring on a guest, so stay tuned. All right, who else do we have here? In Encosin. Hi, Nomiki. I would like to know who to talk to in order to get the pledge going. Holding you to it. 75 subs streaming Among Us, 100 subs, Monster Hunter World on Twitch. Tell them to email. Oh, that's Dorsey. Tell them to email us at thenomikishow@gmail.com. We will figure it out. We can get that pledge going. We got to get the subs up, got to break the system. They're doing all they can right now. We got to keep it going. So join us on Twitch. Let's get those subs up there. Appreciative to everybody rating the chats always, all of our fellow friends at different shows. Mike from PA, of course, the Majority Report, the Surfs, many, many others. Kowalski from Nebraska sends his love, says, oh, mighty seer, as a Libra, what is your purpose? Oh, wait, I just lost it. Hang on. LOL. I don't know if I get that. I'll probably have to come back on that one. And thank you, of course, to Harvey K, who's in the chat right now on YouTube and Twitch. Midi Docs, You're always there working out those algorithms. You're a pro. And of course, our moderators, Bob C, Chokin, The Orb, and Chuck Diesel over at YouTube, and Dorian Sapiens, A Difficult Truth, Our Means, and Nug Wrangler on Twitch for keeping our live chats troll-free. And moderators, I know we keep saying this, send us your addresses at thenomikishow@gmail.com. We want to show you the love. We got some fun swag, want to send it over. And before I go, I have a personal request. I have a very good friend from college. Her mother is very sick right now with COVID. She's been on the ventilator for 9 days now, and she is really, her family is asking for all love, positive thoughts, whatever you believe in. I know so many people have been hit by COVID. I have really made a case public for anybody that I know that has had COVID or been very sick, or family members or friends that have passed, but she's a really good friend, and her mother's name is Rosie. So if you feel comfortable, if you want to, please just think about her for a little bit. Try to send her all the love, because it's very tight, and I've known them for a long time, and she's really just a beautiful person, and she has 2 very, very young grandchildren. So please keep her in your prayers, your thoughts, your energy, whatever you can. So I just want to throw that out there. So. All right. On that note, we'll see you tomorrow. Stay in solidarity.